Hey guys, so a little note before we get started on this video. I do mention several times throughout the video that it is spoiler free. However, because it's the second half of the book, there were some things that I said that as I've gone through and edited a lot of it that weren't direct spoilers but do hint at things happening or suggest things happening that some people may consider strong spoilers that they want to avoid. So I want to let you know right now that while I have kept all the intense obvious spoilers out until the end of the video, there are some things that I say and allude to that you may be able to guess at, or that maybe directly state a plot point if you really notice them, but I have kept it as vague as possible. But in case you are really terrified of spoilers, know that is some level of very vague, mild type spoilers-ish you may want to avoid. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say for here. So anyway, let's just get right into the actual video. Hi friends, so I keep forgetting to start this dang vlog before I actually read Vanity Fair for the day. So I have a lot of thoughts. It is I believe it's the 17th of February, so very far into the month that I'm starting this, but mostly that's partially because I've just been really tired from all of my work and school, and then also just my seasonal depression has been kicking me. So I have been reading Vanity Fair, I just haven't really gotten myself to talk about it. Additionally, I just didn't have a lot of thoughts. There were a lot of just kind of additional build-ups. So where we left off was with the Battle of Waterloo. That's all I'm going to say because I want to avoid spoilers as much as possible until the end of this vlog. But for now, spoiler-free. I mean, the Battle of Waterloo, this takes place during the Napoleonic Wars, so I don't feel like that's too much of a spoiler. Anyway, so we just finished the Battle of Waterloo, and we got into the aftermath of that for our characters and how things have fallen out. And it's been very interesting. I started off, I mentioned in my last vlog, which I will link down below if you have not seen that yet, but I mentioned that I preferred Becky's sections to Amelia's, and while in many ways that was true for a long time, it's actually become more that I'm more interested in Amelia's perspective in some ways. I think part of it was just with Becky, we kind of reached a point where it was just focusing on, oh yeah, she's still going up in society, moving up in society. She's still very manipulative and cunning and a very good liar. Now I'm back a little bit more in Becky's corner as there was something very dramatic that just happened with her husband. And yeah, very intriguing. I honestly have come to really like Rawdon as a character. He is very flawed, but I also think he has a lot more character growth than I was expecting him to have, so I've really liked that. Frankly, I am getting a little bit concerned that the women in this book, their character development is not going to go much further than where it is. I don't know. Amelia could develop a bit more, but I don't have faith in Thackeray as far as building up an interesting female character goes who's not evil, if that makes sense. I don't have faith that he'll make her have depth. I think he's very much a Victorian man writing this book, and that he is, I just don't think he's going to create a good female character, good as far as morals go, who is as interesting as the more evil character version of the woman, which anyway, makes me sad, but we'll see. He could surprise me. I'm willing to have an open mind. So yeah, overall, I'm still liking it. I don't know what I'd rate it at this point. I feel like I do need to finish it before I know. It potentially could be a 5-star, but it potentially could be a 4-star too, but definitely higher than a 3 stars. I've enjoyed it enough that I can officially say that. Where exactly it will land, though, we shall see. I am a little bit worried. So we just had a scene too, not long ago, several chapters ago, but not terribly long ago, where they were playing charades, at least the version of charades they did at the time, which was a little bit more theatrical than it is nowadays. But they were doing charades, and Becky plays Clytemnestra, who is a famous female Greek character. And now I'm very concerned. This has not happened. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, so it's not a spoiler, it's just my prediction, that may be a foreshadow to her trying to murder her husband. I don't know if Thackeray's going to go that dark, but I've said before that I almost thought she was going to kill someone and it wouldn't have surprised me, and it still would not surprise me if she did that. But I just think it was very interesting that she played Clytemnestra, who in Greek mythology kills her own husband with the help of her lover. And yeah, I'm not totally sure that's what's going to happen, but I feel like that's something that very much could happen. So we'll see how it goes, and I will update you later. I'm going to try to at least have a couple more updates in this vlog, especially since, I only have like 10 days left in this month, so I feel like I can possibly, I don't know. We'll just see how it goes. But that's my update for now. I'm going to be reading my 20 pages for today now. And yeah, like I said, I will update you whenever I feel like I have more thoughts to share. Hey guys, so I was really going back and forth on whether or not I would actually do this clip just because it's evening, my lighting is awful. But I do have thoughts on Vanity Fair. I just read my portion for today. It is the 21st, Monday, so it's been a few days since I last updated you. But I have had a bit of a change of heart when it comes specifically to Captain Dobbin. Now, or Major Dobbin, I guess he is at this point. I really appreciated him in the beginning. Really appreciated is not the right word. In the beginning, I actually found him very flat, but I appreciated that his personality was very sweet. He was a kind person within this overwhelmingly not kind society. But he just was really boring to me. He was like a boring version of Gabriel Oak from Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy, so I was really not loving him all that much. But this book does a really interesting thing. I'm going to keep it as vague as possible, of course, because spoilers will be at the end. I think I mentioned that in the last clip. Anyway, this book starts off with these characters when they're young and looking forward to life and trying to figure out how they want to live and really kind of living for the day because they don't have this perception of how things can go wrong, how death can appear. And we follow them across a couple of decades as they grow older. And so we're seeing specifically Dobbin grow up, and he's become a middle-aged man, basically, or almost a middle-aged man. And it's interesting to see him grow, like he and Amelia in a way, but especially him, I feel like he's been able to overcome his naivete that really made him very bland to me in the beginning. He has really, I think he understands the world in a way that he didn't at the beginning of this book, but he still is holding on to the treasures of his heart, specifically Amelia, who he is in love with. I don't feel like that's a spoiler because right from the moment he sees her in the beginning of this book, he falls in love with her, and he's really maintaining that, and it's really beautiful to see and also heartbreaking. There have been many scenes, especially in recent chapters. I just am about in chapter 55, I believe. No, 60. That's 60. And the chapter I'm on is called The Old Piano, so that may give people who have read this an idea of a little bit of the gentle, quiet scene that just occurred that's also really heartbreaking for Dobbin. I don't know, it's really interesting to see them grow up in this way. I don't feel like a lot of classics or books in general really take you on that life journey. I feel like there's a lot of coming of age where they're children and they become adults, but not maybe as many of them being adults and them just becoming decades older adults and just how that impacts their perspective on life. I'm very curious to see how the rest of this book goes. I really, depending on how it goes, I feel like it could end up being a 5-star. Like if it ends in a way that really grips me, I do feel like it will deserve a 5 stars. But if it falls flat for me, I think it will be a 4 stars. Right now, it's very much in between. Like there's been a few aspects that I haven't loved as much, but I do really, really like a lot of the aspects of the story. Despite its length, I'm finding the language to be very easy to get into, easy to understand, especially if you have some level of background in classics. I think it's very easy to understand what they're saying in this book, and so it makes the book feel like it goes by a lot faster than maybe it actually does because it is so many pages. But yeah, so we'll have to see where this ends up. I really don't know where it's going to be. Also, this is not a library book. It is just a used copy from a library, if you're wondering about the little library mark right there. But anyway, I think that's all I'm going to say right now in this really bad lighting clip. But I wanted to talk about Dobbin because my interpretation of him and my perception of him has really changed throughout the novel in a very positive way. I still feel like Amelia does not deserve him. I really hope she figures out and opens her eyes to the fact that this other person in her life is not as great as she builds them up to be in her mind, and it's really getting in the way of a lot of things in her life, not just her relationship with Dobbin, but also with the way she's raised her son and the way she's been able to relate with her family. I just feel like she's really cut herself off because she's so obsessed with this ideal she's built up in her mind about her past that's not real. And so I am very curious to see if she overcomes that or not. I'm very curious to see if we get much more of Becky. She's kind of disappeared for a while. She had a really big blow up of her lifestyle, and so she's in a very different place at this point, but I'm very curious to see if she comes back in. I feel like she has to at some point. I feel like just leaving Becky there would definitely make this book not a 5 stars. It might even bring it all the way down to a 3.5. I don't think I would give it a 3 stars. I think I've liked it enough to make sure, yes, it's higher than a 3 stars, but Becky just needs something by the end of this. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. I will check in with you later, hopefully with better lighting. Hey guys, so I only have 40 pages left of Vanity Fair, which equals 2 more days of reading, as I've been reading about 20 pages a day. And I wanted to give some thoughts before I give my final thoughts in the next clip. So we have reached a point where things seem to be coming in a way full circle. Again, I'm not going to give spoilers yet until my final thoughts, but yeah, everything seems to be coming full circle in a way that's very interesting to me. We have had Becky back in the picture, which I'm excited for. I've been very curious to see how her story will end, and I'm still curious to see how it ends up coming to an end in the next 40 pages. I do have some theories, but as to whether or not those theories will come to pass, not a lot has to happen, but some specific things have to happen for it to work. Some things I kind of don't want to happen, but also I wouldn't be surprised if they do. I know in my last clip I also talked about Dobbin and how his character has grown on me. I really have decided his character has fluctuated a lot with me. I do still like him better than I did at the beginning, but I just feel like William Thackeray comes across as a very judgmental person. And I know this is fiction, and so it feels wrong to judge him based on what's in this book. But he really inputs his own authorial voice a lot into this story in a way that does feel like it's coming from him. It doesn't feel like it's just a narratorial voice that he invented. It feels like it's him. And I could be wrong. I need to learn a bit more about him. But he comes across as the type of person who is discussing the hypocrisy of Vanity Fair, of the people in Vanity Fair, these people who are rich and wealthy and they do things for pleasure, and yet they have these standards that they will be very judgmental of other people doing certain things, but they themselves are allowed to do it. And yet I just could never imagine him writing a character like Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, Ruth from Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, or even Margaret Hale from North and South, also by Elizabeth Gaskell, or I'm trying to break out of Elizabeth Gaskell. I guess a lot of the female characters that Thomas Hardy writes, like I don't think he could write a Bathsheba Everdeen or a Tess from Tess of the D'Urbervilles, because those female characters in Victorian literature have a lot more depth to them. They're not all good and they're not all bad. They are flawed women, and it makes them so much more interesting and real. Whereas the women in this, and I know this is a satire, so maybe I need to be willing to read more by him and see if my theories about his ability to write female characters is correct. But we have our two main female characters are Rebecca and Amelia. And I've mentioned before, Amelia is this perfect angel. And her only flaw is really innocence and naivete. Like, those are her flaws. Other than that, she is just a perfect angel in every way. So sweet and so good. And it almost feels like Thackeray is trying to say this is the ideal woman. This woman who's very passive and obedient and just kind and gentle to everyone, and who's so loyal to her husband in a way that's almost ridiculous. I'm trying not to spoil anything, but just she's very loyal and trustworthy and everything, and she just never does anything wrong. Like, she's flawed, but her only flaws are, again, naivete, and innocence, which in many ways isn't a complete flaw. At least it seems like that in his mind. And then Dobbin is this perfect man who is so, like, wise and intelligent and a good leader, and maybe he's not physically attractive, but he's a good man and he's very caring and devoted. But he ends up being very judgmental of Rebecca. I don't know. And then Rebecca, on the other hand, as the evil woman, is just absolutely full of flaws and has no really redeeming qualities. She's manipulative and conniving and just a wicked woman who's doing all sorts of bad things. It doesn't happen on page, but she's probably having sexual affairs. She's gambling. She's lying and making fun of people. And so Rebecca herself is all evil all the time. And I just don't think I would trust William Thackeray to write a woman who's in the middle, which unfortunately has made this book harder to love. Also, going back to Dobbin, I feel like he can be kind of judgmental. Like, yes, Rebecca's a horrible person, but I don't know. I think there's more to be applauded for someone who's kind and generous to someone who they know will never help them in return. And that's not to say anybody should be subject to Rebecca and her whims. Like, you need to draw lines. You need to self-preserve with situations like that, but that doesn't mean you have to treat them like a mortal enemy, and that doesn't mean you have to leave them to these horrible situations. Like, I think there's always some room to provide some level of kindness and help. Again, does that mean that you need to be best friends with Rebecca or save her from all her problems? No. Or someone like her? No, absolutely not. But again, I think that there's always room for some level of respect, and Dobbin just does not treat Rebecca very well. Like, he almost seems to want to cast her to the dogs. Like, he just does not care what happens to her. That wouldn't bother me if it didn't feel like Thackeray was trying to make Dobbin look perfect. He's so perfect that he just totally recognizes sin and he doesn't want anything to do with it, as opposed to kind of almost seeing sin and sinful people as like a disease, like you have to avoid them because you don't want to catch it, as opposed to someone who's just hurting and wounded and is trying to figure things out. It's hard to say in this because Rebecca is this fictional character who is made to be as awful as possible and as sinful as possible, and she does not care that she's sinful. I don't know, and maybe some of this is coming from just recent thoughts I've had, not to get too religious, but recent thoughts I've had on what being truly good and kind is. and what, specifically for me, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ allows people to do, what it means for people, and what it, how it's able to help people as far as healing them as opposed to just simply saving them, and the difference between those words. But anyway, again, I don't want to get too religious, but I've been thinking a lot about that and reading a lot about that sort of thing, and so I think I'm a little extra sensitive to someone in a book like Dobbin who's being portrayed as perfect, and yet having this thing that I see as a flaw, but the author seems to be seeing as a good quality that makes Dobbin kind of unforgiving in a lot of ways. At least unforgiving as far as, like, it's almost like he's a point keeper a little bit of like, oh, this person has 1,000,001 tallies, and so in the wickedness category, so I'm going to just completely abandon them and think of them as horrible. Whereas this person, you know, they only have a few tallies in the wickedness area, or they're a man, and so we're more willing to be open to whatever they're doing. For example, with George, he is very forgiving of George's faults. He recognizes them, but he's very forgiving of George's faults because who knows why? Because frankly, George was just as bad as Becky. He was just maybe a little more naive. But for some reason, it's okay for George as a man to behave the way he did, and Dobbin will still be his friend, but it's not okay for Becky because she's a woman. So anyway, so it's just interesting. It feels like it's not necessarily the book, it feels like it's the author who has a lot of these ideas that I don't agree with, and I don't like the way he explores them in the book. That being said, it's still very interesting. I think these characters, I mean, they're providing me a lot of thought and food for thought, and Rebecca is just so interesting to follow. I love her sections the most, for sure, although Amelia and Dobbin's interactions are also very interesting, and Amelia's relationship with her son is also super interesting to watch because she is so naive that I feel like it very much reflects in the way she treats her son, but also just the standards of the time as far as parenting goes and what was expected. It's interesting because I feel like Thackeray is commenting actually on parenting styles and how children learn and what's important to teach our children, because I think back then there was, especially among higher classes, a tendency to just love your own children and kind of want to, like, almost saying like spoiling your children and showing them that love, and getting them their education, and that sort of thing was kind of seen as like the best way to parent, the most loving way to parent. Whereas he kind of points out, like Dobbin, his perfect character, when he kind of shows he's Amelia's son's godfather, and so he has moments where he's able to be a father figure to this boy, and he shows a little bit more awareness of, you know, helping this boy, recognizing when he's behaving incorrectly and things like that. And so it's interesting to see that. I'm not going to comment too much on that because I don't think it's a huge focus of the story, but it was interesting reading that. And yeah, so basically my feelings about Dobbin are very all over the place because I like him in a lot of ways. I think he shows a lot of interesting strengths that I appreciate, but he also has some flaws that I don't think the author even sees as flaws, which, yeah, I need to learn more about William Thackeray because I feel like I'm making a lot of assumptions about him that aren't fair based on this satirical novel that he's writing. But I also think with satirical novels, you're able to see a lot more the thoughts and opinions of the author because they're trying to make it satirical. They're trying to show their political and social opinions through this story that's a little over the top, maybe has very stereotypical characters, caricatured characters, that can show these different ideas and the bad and the good very extremely. And so in some ways I do feel comfortable saying Thackeray has maybe some of these flaws in his thinking, as well as some other interesting thoughts about things. But again, it's still a novel, and so I think I want to learn more about William Thackeray. Most of what I've heard about him has come from his interactions with other authors like the Brontes and Charles Dickens, and he was not necessarily the greatest with them, at least from the little bit I know about it. So that probably does not help my interpretation of this book. I also am very curious if you know of other books by William Thackeray where he writes about women in particular, especially if you feel like the women in those books do hit more in the middle of the extremes that Amelia and Rebecca represent. I'd love to know, because I do want to see him writing more, I don't want to say more interesting female characters, because these characters are interesting, especially, like I said, Rebecca, Amelia as well, but in a different way. Anyway, I would be interested in seeing him write more realistic women, I guess I should say, or more commonly seen types of women, because I definitely think there are Amelias and Rebeccas in the world. Like, they do exist, but they're kind of more few and far between. Also, sorry, the lighting keeps adjusting strangely, but anyway, I'm almost done with this clip, and then we'll get into the final thoughts in the next one. But yeah, so I hope I haven't repeated too many thoughts that I've already said. But yes, I need to read more about Thackeray, read more of his works after this, so I can kind of get a better idea of my opinion of him, because I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks in this book, is some of the things I disagree with on his ways of viewing the world. He just is comes across as pretty racist, which I'll get to more in my final thoughts, I think, as well as being sexist, and it's a little bit tough for me to read. Things like that, especially in classics, don't usually grate on me too much, just because it's the time, and not that that makes excuses for people, but it's important to recognize that when you grow up being taught something, it's really hard to break away from that. It takes a lot, and it takes the spread of ideas, which not everybody was able to access. So anyway, it usually doesn't bother me, but it's pretty repetitive in this and pretty obvious in it. And I think that's why it's bothering me more than it usually does in books like this. But anyway, we'll discuss that in the next clip. This clip was really long, so I'm going to end here, and I will come back to you once I finish the last 40 pages. Okay guys, it is the 28th of February, and I have officially finished Vanity Fair. Some non-spoilery thoughts before I get into the spoilery section. I'm basically just going to say I did enjoy the ending quite a bit. It did not go quite in the direction I thought it would, although it did go there somewhat, but I really enjoy kind of the almost morally gray aspect of pieces of the ending, especially for a book that I've talked a lot about how it's really falling on two extremes a lot, the good and evil kind of side, and it still did, but it added a little bit more depth to it in the end that I really appreciated. I would probably say it's not a 5-star read. There was definitely enough about it that I didn't super enjoy, or that I struggled with, that made me feel like I can't quite give it a 5 stars, but it's honestly probably like a 4.5 stars, so it's very close. I really enjoyed it, and it's one I'd definitely be willing to reread in the future. So if you were here for the non-spoilery-ish stuff, that's it. I'm going to go into more direct spoilers now, so if you want to avoid those, feel free to leave. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. As for the rest of you who are willing to listen to the spoilers, whether you've read it or you haven't and you just don't care about spoilers, I will say that the whole interaction with Becky in the end was so fascinating to me. Just the way, first of all, I'll start with Dobbin. He ends up finally ditching Amelia and saying, you know what, I'm done being treated this way, I'm going to leave, which part of me was like, yes, that's good. I feel like you deserve to take care of yourself, find some fulfillment in life elsewhere, because clearly Amelia is not giving you what you want and likely deserve. But I also always have a bit of an issue where there's kind of a sense of like, I've done all this for you, so I deserve for you to love me. Like, I've given you all this stuff and I've done everything for you, and therefore you have to fall in love with me. I feel a little uncomfortable with that. So that aspect of it, I was kind of on the fence with that. Part of me was like, yes, Dobbin, finally speak up for yourself, say what you're thinking, leave, get away from this unfortunate situation because it's clearly not healthy for you, because he was being used a lot and kind of abused in some ways by Amelia. If not abused, then exploited. But I also did have that feeling of like, okay, but your argument is that she should love you because you've done all this for her. And so, I don't know, it's kind of in between where I'm like, you're right. If she really was worth your time, she would recognize what you've done for her and love you, especially compared to her husband, who treated her like trash, frankly. But at the same time, again, that like, you have to fall in love with me because I have paid money for you and done all this stuff. It just feels like it's like this business transaction, and it just feels strange to me. However, I do find it very interesting how things end with Becky and Amelia, because we have this scene where Amelia at this point obviously recognizes Becky's still the same. She's still manipulative and indulges in probably not the best forms of entertainment. But Becky has enough heart in her to recognize that Amelia doesn't deserve this, and so she gets Amelia out of there. Like, she gets Amelia away from the issue because she recognizes that Dobbin and Amelia don't deserve to be basically in Vanity Fair. They don't deserve to be experiencing the treatment and the situations that Becky herself gets in and honestly enjoys, but she recognizes their virtue and their integrity, and she basically throws herself under the bus and recognizes... I honestly loved that scene where she just gives Amelia the letter from George that he had given her the night before he was killed at Waterloo, because it was just so good, because I feel like Becky was the only one who would be willing to just straight out tell Amelia, like, you're being ridiculous. Your husband was not a good man. He is not worth your loyalty. Dobbin will do so much better for you, will be able to provide so much better for you, and actually love you the way you deserve to be loved. I've mentioned before too that Becky really comes across as a sociopath, and part of that idea of being a antisocial personality disorder, having an antisocial personality disorder, is that you're not able to feel emotions very well, but you're able to understand them and recognize them. And I feel like this was a case of Becky is still Becky. She still has that emotional instability a little bit, but she recognizes Dobbin and Amelia and their purity of emotion. And for once in her life, she uses her ability to read people to help these people that are kind of the only people who have really effectively touched her in her life. And so it was very interesting to see how that all played out, because after that, Becky, again, is still Becky. She goes on to effectively, I mean, we don't know for sure, it's not solidly said, but we can infer that she murdered Joss, basically. She murdered Joseph in order to inherit money. Of course, again, we don't know that for sure, but I spent this whole time thinking I would not be surprised if Becky killed someone. And we have Joseph die under mysterious circumstances when he had this insurance on his life that would go mostly to Becky, or at least in large part to Becky. And he mysteriously dies not long after Dobbin told him to leave and get away from her. And super creepy, dark ending, if you think about it, especially because this book is so interesting because it feels, frankly, very lighthearted. But there's a couple of things that are very melancholy and difficult and really dramatic that happen in this book, and I kind of liked that balance a lot. One thing that was mildly disappointing for me in the ending was I wish we had been able to see Rawdon a bit more, the older Rawdon. I really found his character fascinating and just heartbreaking in a lot of ways. Like, he had a lot of flaws, but you can see him grow a lot throughout the book, particularly when he became a father. Like, he really began to recognize that he needed to behave in better ways. He began to genuinely love someone outside of himself, and just his fate and how things fell out for him with Becky was really sad to me. But unfortunately, within Vanity Fair, I think Rebecca was always meant to come out on top in some way, and so in unfortunately, I do understand why Thackeray decided that Rawdon had to die, because the themes of this book were working towards that sort of ending for him, unfortunately, for the sake of Rebecca really engaging more fully in Vanity Fair and being who she was, very manipulative, very cunning. Unfortunately, a lot of people are well aware now of who she is, but it doesn't bother her. Like, she just, as long as she has money and she can do what she wants and she can get at least some people to love her, she's fine, which again comes back to the antisocial personality disorder. Like, she just very much does not really care as long as she's taken care of. So yeah, anyway, super interesting characters, really enjoyed the story. Again, I did have some issues with some of the racism and sexism that was present in this book. I don't usually get bothered by that at all, but in this it was repetitive enough and put in a way that it made me uncomfortable to read at points. With the sexism, I guess another thing I did kind of dislike about the ending was just kind of the interpretation, really, of the whole book, of that when this woman who is very vain and manipulative and gets into all sorts of inappropriate activities does so, she is seen as this villain. Like, Rebecca is seen as just this awful woman. But when there's a lot of men in this book who also are not very good and engage in inappropriate behaviors and stuff, they don't get nearly as much flack from society or from the author even in this book as Rebecca does. And that really got on my nerves. And then with the racism, there were a few characters in this that were Black that just the descriptions of them were really, not comfortable to read, very stereotyped, very honestly dehumanizing in some ways, and it was just very uncomfortable to read at points. But like I said, overall I did enjoy it. It's one I will revisit again. And now I'm excited to get into Gone with the Wind. I'll probably be starting that tomorrow. Very excited. You can see that right there. But anyway, yeah, that will be great. Thank you so much for watching, and also for those who have joined in this little read along. I really appreciate your support. I hope that you will continue with me into Gone with the Wind. Let me know down below some of your thoughts that you've had on Vanity Fair, whether you have read it before and just want to comment, or if you are participating in the read along and want to mention any thoughts you've had on the book or any thoughts I had. I'm sorry this was a very rambling video, but just kind of the way it was gonna go, I guess. I really was just kind of sharing off the top of my head thoughts as we went along. So I know I've edited a lot of it already up until this clip, so I know it feels a little rambling. So hopefully you at least got some enjoyment out of it. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!